Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, living in a post-factual America. Does the truth even matter anymore when the prize for winning this election is the White House? The hijab makes its debut on state-run television in Egypt, and Al Jazeera gets hacked from Syria. Do South Americans really need a news channel backed by Hugo Chavez? Julian Assange seems to like it. And the games we play to pass the time away. Our web video of the week. There's an old journalistic adage, a rather cynical one, that says never let the facts get in the way of a good story. Well, here's the political equivalent of that, which we heard recently from one of Mitt Romney's strategists when the Romney campaign was accused of playing fast and loose with the truth. We're not going to let our campaign be dictated by fact checkers. On the surface, it's a brazen statement about truth and its relationship with politics. By the time they vote in November, it is estimated that Americans will have been exposed to $3 billion worth of political ads. Now, those kinds of ads have always stretched the truth and made selective use of the facts. But this year, in the U.S., the facts seem to matter less than they ever have, which means that the role of the media to get past the rhetoric and to the truth is more important than it's ever been, and it is not at all clear that the American media have the appetite or the stomach to do the job. Our starting point this week is Washington and the road to the White House.
Guess how many trade agreements our presidents negotiated? None. None.
It's the wild, wild west in the United States. The candidates pretty free to say what they want.
I want to give incentives to companies that are investing in you.
There is no referee in the American political system. People want the media to be the referee, but there is no referee.
President Obama.
Governor Romney.
So that's the big question. What can you get away with?
The answer seems to be just about anything. Take this political ad, for example, that the Romney campaign put out in the first week of August on Barack Obama and welfare.
President Obama quietly announced a plan to gut welfare reform by dropping work requirements.
Enter the fact checkers, the people who are supposed to keep politicians honest. The Washington Post and PolitiFact.com pulled no punches.
At PolitiFact, we gave it our lowest rating, Pants on Fire, because we found that the Romney campaign was just wrong. So Neil Newhouse, who is a Republican pollster, made a quote that quickly became very famous. He said, "We are not going to allow our campaign to be dictated by fact checkers." And he was explaining why the Romney campaign was not going to stop airing this ad.
Sure enough, Mitt Romney's running mate, Paul Ryan, took what the fact checkers called a flat-out lie and happily repeated it on the campaign trail. And it was no accident.
If you tell a lie, it's more effective to tell a big one that people will often remember and actually be influenced by a lie of grander proportions. And the reason for that is simply that those messages coming from the candidates are simple, they're sound bites, they're easy to remember, than going back and looking at all of the details and factual information to try to determine the veracity of a given statement.
Campaigns make a tactical decision that even when something is false, sometimes they're just going to keep repeating it. And of course, it's not like falsehoods are new in American politics. The difference now is the campaigns are choosing to continue with this false message, essentially admitting we don't care that it's false. We're going to keep airing it because it's a message we want to get out.
One of the reasons we're calling this the post-truth campaign is because we used to argue about how to interpret facts, and now we argue about the nature of reality. And to the extent that we no longer even have a consensus opinion on what's real.
He spent the last 4 years laying the foundation for a new government-centered society.
One campaign is saying, it's your opinion that these facts are this way. Our opinion is this other thing.
I have never been somebody who believes that government can or should try to solve every problem.
It creates a situation where it's very hard to have a uniform conversation about an issue.
Do we need fact checkers? Absolutely yes. Do fact checkers make a difference? To some degree, I believe they do, but they certainly do not make as big a difference and certainly do not have the influence that the candidates' statements make, irrespective of whether they are true or false.
It wasn't supposed to be this way. The internet, the truism said, is full of potential fact-checkers who could keep political leaders and candidates for office honest. That truism turned out to be false.
Because the media is so fractured and there are so many different sources, candidates and campaigns don't necessarily feel like they have to be too afraid of any one source. So maybe 30 years ago, if Walter Cronkite said that you weren't telling the truth on CBS News, then a candidate would be really frightened of that and would immediately change what they were saying. Today, if a newspaper or a television show says that a candidate is not telling the truth about something, the candidate doesn't necessarily need to be afraid because they know that they're speaking to voters through a variety of different media. They may be speaking to their own voters through their more partisan media.
There are a million different ways that people are getting their political information. They're getting it from websites, from Facebook and Twitter. They're getting it from chain emails. They're getting it from cable television, where they can often find a cable channel that they agree with. If they're conservative in the United States, they probably watch Fox News. If they're liberal, they probably watch MSNBC. And in doing that, they're going around the filters, and that allows the politicians to go around the filters.
It's such a noisy media environment, really, that when someone says something that's not factually correct in the service of making a broader argument, there's no gatekeeper, there's no referee. That's not how the system works.
Hey, good to be with you, Matt.
That system places a premium on access. Perhaps that's what stopped NBC News from really pressing Paul Ryan on the lies he spouted in his speech at the Republican convention.
Didn't you owe it to the people in that room to say that?
But at least NBC could find Ryan. Try locating the super PACs, the political action committees that are ostensibly independent of the official campaigns, but really aren't.
I don't think Mitt Romney understands what he's done to people's lives by closing the plant.
The super PACs do the dirty work, spending huge money on attack ads, like this one from a pro-Obama group, which falsely accused Mitt Romney of causing a woman's death by shutting down her husband's steel plant and denying the woman health care.
She passed away in 22 days.
The problem with the super PAC really is that there's nobody there to talk to. There's nobody there to hold accountable. So who is it? Well, it's a bunch of strategists sitting in an office outside of Washington, D.C. Very few people know who they are, but the super PAC, the people who run it, are not going to talk to the media. They're not going to answer questions. And so they can keep running their ads and saying those things and reaching those people. So the super PAC can reach them, but then when it comes time for accountability, there's nobody there to hold accountable. And that's why they really have even more latitude to deceive people if they choose to.
That's not the change I voted for.
Latitude to deceive. That's like a license to lie. The American voter, meanwhile, is left to sort political fact from fiction.
You have the candidates' messages that are going to be coming through in ad after ad after ad. You're going to have the debates, you're going to have their speeches, and then you're going to have media coverage. You're going to have fact checkers and competing facts, competing statements. And I think one thing that many people are apt to do today is to simply say, look, I can't understand any of it. I can't make heads or tails of either one and determine what's true, what's false. And so I'm going to retreat to my ideological position. And at that point, we're tossing facts out and simply voting on our ideological positions more than anything else.
A case of information overload, more like misinformation motherload. And Election Day in America is still 2 months away. Our Global Village Voice is now on the U.S. media and their coverage of the election campaign.
Politicians rarely lie. They mostly bullshit. Like Obama says, we didn't go to war against Libya. It was just a kinetic military encounter. Yeah, sure, whatever. Bush didn't flat out lie about Iraq's nuclear weapons. Okay, Bush did flat out lie. Reporters don't call out politicians for misleading with half-truths because we all know that we're entitled to any opinion about political candidates except surprise.
The mainstream media is facing serious economic challenges, and one of the first places they cut is in editorial talent. That dilutes the ability of the media to be more vigilant and increases the likelihood that the media will become more partisan.
We're always looking for new faces for the program. If you'd like to share your thoughts on the news media as one of our Global Village voices, you can connect with us on Facebook and Twitter, where we will let you know what stories we're working on, or you can just get in touch with us via email at listeningpost@aljazeera.net. And don't forget our free video podcast. It's on iTunes. Just go looking for The Listening Post, Al Jazeera English, and you'll find us there. Time now for Listening Post News Bites. Julian Assange says the waiting game has only just begun. The WikiLeaks co-founder has done his first televised interview since claiming asylum in June at the Ecuadorian embassy in London. He told the Venezuelan-based news channel Telesur that the standoff with the British authorities over the extradition request from Sweden could go on for another year.
Creo que se resolverá en 6 a 12 meses.
Assange has been accused of sexual assault in Sweden, but has refused to go there to face questions because he says the Swedes will probably hand him over to the U.S. A grand jury in Virginia has been considering charging Assange over the release of those classified U.S. military and diplomatic documents. For those of you who don't know much about Telesur, we'll be looking at the channel and its news coverage in the second half of the program. In Bolivia, the relationship between President Evo Morales' government and the private media there continues to sour. The government has filed criminal complaints against 3 news outlets after they were accused of inciting racism and discrimination for their coverage of a speech made by the president. In that speech, Morales blamed the lack of food in eastern Bolivia on the laziness of the people there. The next day, his comments were front-page news, including in the La Paz-based daily newspaper El Diario, as well as Bolivia's oldest news agency. Those outlets were then accused of distortion and trying to create social conflict. Journalists took to the streets to protest, saying the government was using a vague anti-racism law to stifle freedom of expression and intimidate independent media. The U.S.-based Press Freedom Group, the Committee to Protect Journalists, put it this way: it is outrageous that the Bolivian government is pressing criminal charges for merely reporting on comments made by the president. The use of racism charges against the press may result in a chilling effect that will stifle debate on critical issues. For decades, Egypt's state-run broadcaster aligned itself with the politics of Hosni Mubarak. Then it backed the Transitional Military Council. Now there are signs, symbolic but significant, that the broadcaster is changing its political stripes yet again. On the 2nd of September, a newsreader named Fatma Nabil reportedly became the first ever hijab-wearing anchor woman in the network's 50-year existence. Analysts in Egypt are calling it an indication that the state broadcaster is changing because of the newly elected president Mohamed Morsi, a former member of the Muslim Brotherhood. Female journalists say that under the Mubarak government, there was a tacit ban on wearing headscarves and religious dress on the air, as state-run media, in accordance with the regime's wishes, tried to keep religion out of state-controlled institutions. According to Egypt's new information minister, Salah Abdel Maqsood, who is also a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, the unofficial ban was being lifted in the spirit of the revolution, and that more veiled news presenters will be following Ms. Nabil's lead. In our last program, we reported on how Al Jazeera has been criticized by supporters of the Assad government for its coverage of the Syrian conflict. This past week, the network's website was hacked, allegedly by a group loyal to Assad calling itself Al-Rashidun, or the Guided Ones. It replaced the site's front page with this statement, saying the cyber attack was to protest Al Jazeera's support of militant terrorism and one-sided coverage of Syria. In a statement, the network admitted its external services had been hacked, but said that the attackers did not directly compromise any Al Jazeera web server. U.S. officials are now involved in the investigation since the network's external service provider is a U.S.-based company, and measures have been taken to ensure that any future attacks are unsuccessful. Earlier, we touched on Telesur, the South American news channel that interviewed Julian Assange. Telesur first went on the air back in 2005. Like other relatively new international news channels such as Russia's RT, Iran's Press TV, China's CCTV, and France 24, Telesur is government-backed. Inspired by Venezuela's President Hugo Chavez and jointly funded by other left-wing governments across the region, the channel was designed to provide an alternative to Latin America's privately owned media conglomerates, the bulk of which lean to the political right. Now, depending on who's writing the reviews, Telesur is either a pioneering and much-needed media voice or a mere propaganda tool for Chavez and his political allies. The Listening Post's Marcela Pizarro now on Telesur and whether it's worth watching.
The brainchild of Venezuela's President Hugo Chavez, supported by left-wing leaders and governments including Cuba, Bolivia, Ecuador, and Argentina. Latin America's pan-regional TV news channel, Telesur. If you wanted to see Latin America's so-called 21st century socialist revolution, this is where it's being televised.
Telesur, la señal informativa de América Latina.
The motto of Telesur itself is, our north is the south. That is to say, the objective is to tell the South about the South by the South itself. That's something that has never been done in the past.
Telesur is the most Latin American channel across the region's media landscape. We offer 24-hour information from all the countries in our region. And that means that Latin Americans have access to a much more accurate way of seeing themselves. 7 years since the start, Telesur continues with its aim, information for integration.
The basic concept of Telesur is great. Latin Americans informing themselves about what is happening in the region without having to pass through the US media lens. It's the alternative to what CNN and other transnational channels do.
So when audiences tune into Telesur, what they see on their screens is different. Extensive coverage of social movements around Latin America and beyond. Roundtable discussions on the Western world's financial crisis. Documentaries highlighting the plight of the continent's indigenous peoples. And as for news on the region, what you see on Telesur is not what you would see elsewhere on Latin America's mostly privately owned conservative media. A defining moment for Telesur was the 2009 overthrow of the left-wing president in Honduras, Manuel Zelaya.
What makes it different is how Telesur has covered each story differently. In Honduras, we showed how the president was taken from his house by force. And we broke the hegemonic discourse of other media outlets. We also had the cameras on when the army attacked the crowds of Zelaya's supporters when they demanded his return. We told the story from the point of view of the people on the ground, unlike the rest of the media.
Having come into being to provide a Latin American alternative to news organizations like CNN Español, Telesur now finds itself at the heart of a media conflict that we've reported on extensively here at the Listening Post. From one end of the continent to the other, left-wing governments in Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, Peru, Argentina are all at odds with the mainstream media in those countries. And most of those media outlets are backed by the political right.
The mainstream media dominates the waves in Latin America. CNN and others, most of the private media tends to identify with the people who are against the left. It's about 6 or 7 companies that control about 80 to 85% of the news.
There's no doubt that big media groups dominate Latin America. But outlets that want to provide a counterweight to that media power need to have solid professional standards and not just rely on left-wing discourse. They need to have high-quality output that actually engages the audience.
However, to engage an audience, you have to find one. Telesur has a distribution problem. It's had trouble making deals with regional cable companies and has even claimed it's a victim of a boycott. In 2008, the channel said it was reaching 3 million homes by cable, about 1/4 of CNN Español's audience. There are also questions about funding. When the channel launched, governments around the region pledged money. But ask Telesur who funds the channel today, and the story gets murky. which only goes to reinforce the notion that Telesur is Tele-Chavez in disguise.
Pero estamos transmitiendo en vivo y en directo por Telesur.
Then there's the issue of editorial balance and credibility.
Yo no veo las cosas de una manera equilibrada.
I don't think it's balanced at all. It's the same as all the other propaganda projects Chavez has. It would be marvelous if Telesur could be the voice of all Latin Americans. But it's not. It's just one voice.
Propaganda del presidente Chávez.
Canal con una
The channel is very biased on certain issues in Latin America, and I think that's reduced its credibility. Telesur has ended up being a niche reference for the left.
Cristina Fernández cuestionó las recetas neoliberales de ajuste económico.
La política neoliberal.
But it's not managed to transcend this and become a key information supplier for the region.
En toda América Latina.
There's little doubt that the channel reflects the Venezuelan government's own politics and sometimes its foreign policy. During the Arab Spring, if Gaddafi and Assad were looking for positive coverage,
Bashar al-Assad, desde aquí los saludamos.
They found it on Telesur.
We broadcast live out of Green Square in Tripoli and show that it had not been bombarded by Gaddafi, contrary to other news reports. We were in Egypt, Tunisia, in Libya, where we had coverage which broke the dominant discourse of Latin American media, but also media worldwide.
Venezuela's own foreign policies have been reflected in Telesur's coverage of the Arab Spring. Coverage has been benevolent with some dictatorships, like the case of Libya, and while the rest of the world has condemned the killings in Syria, the Venezuelan government is sending Assad fuel, and I think Telesur's coverage is just reproducing its government's policy in a slightly more opaque way.
Some viewers are looking for different perspectives on global events.
¿Cuáles son de verdad las causas que provocan que países cercanos como Qatar y Arabia Saudí estén apoyando esta oposición?
But Telesur's coverage on Venezuela itself has left many thinking the channel lost its way. And this year's presidential elections in Venezuela will show how objective this so-called international news channel really is.
The only people funding Telesur are the governments that support Chavez. And we're not seeing the candidates standing against Chavez in the presidential campaign. It's completely disproportionate.
Our viewers will be able to see coverage of different candidates. We will have special coverage, and we will be broadcasting results live. It's a big challenge, though, and I assure you, no one will offer the coverage we have. It's going to be very nuanced and totally comprehensive.
Comprehensive, but will it be balanced? And can it bring in a wider audience? Or will Telesur be preaching to the converted?
More Global Village Voices now on Telesur.
The existence of Telesur could mean an alternative and an opportunity to have news stories about Latin America. But the political alliances get to be very obvious through the discourse and the content. So rather than becoming a new side or an alternative side, they become an opposite side, which doesn't put them too far from the kind of media they want to avoid.
While Telesur might have a certain political inclination, I would be hard-pressed to think of a news outlet that didn't do the same. And the mere existence of Telesur as a representation of one Latin American reality, a Latin American reality that probably wasn't present in globalized mass media prior to 2005, I think that this is a demonstration of an improvement in the quality of plurality and diversity in in Latin American news media and also globalized mass media.
Finally, we've all done it, played those silly little mind games when we're on our own to either pass the time or to make our surroundings seem a bit more exciting. Walking down the street without stepping on any cracks, counting the seconds for the traffic lights to turn green, slaloming down the hill on our bicycles. Filmmaker Ian Bennett from Follow the Foot has taken some music by the Superhumanoids and blended it with some whimsical visuals to capture a quirky, secretive aspect in the lives of many. Games We Play is our web video of the week. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.
My sister and I played almost the exact same game in the car, except she had a long string sliced through all the man-made objects, all the signs, all the buildings, all the cars. But all the trees and hills and all the natural things, they were fine. My game, I envisioned Sam, an imaginary friend. He ran and jumped as fast as the car was going, or faster, and he never touched the ground. I think most people play these little semi-conscious fleeting games. So take a moment and think about it. What games do you play?